Hello everyone and welcome back to the Lostvell, Chronicle. Before we begin, take a second to comment where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where these forgotten pieces of American history travel in the middle of the night. Tonight's case isn't folklore, it isn't an urban legend. It's a documented, government-sealed incident tied to a forgotten Cold War research site buried deep in the Arizona desert. In 2019, a 21-year-old hiker disappeared near Yucca Valley. Search teams combed miles of sand, chaparral, and canyon washes. No tracks, no pack, no clues. The desert swallowed her whole. 4 months later, a private investigator discovered a welded steel hatch hidden under desert brush, a shaft omitted from every modern map. And what he found inside was a young woman, alive. Barely, held underground in a chamber that should not have existed. Dim the lights, settle in, and let's begin. Emily Carter locked her front door at 5:42 a.m., just as the horizon over Yucca Valley began to glow with its thin line of desert gold. She was a creature of routine. Her friends joked that she treated hiking the way others treated morning coffee, and the Serpentine Wash Trail had always been her comfort route. Safe, familiar, predictable. That morning, the air was cool enough that she pulled her jacket tighter around her, but not cold enough to slow her stride. She moved quickly, almost energized, as if the day ahead carried some quiet promise only she understood. Before pulling out of her driveway, she sent a brief message to her younger sister, Lily. "Heading out. Signal's weak today. I'll check in later." It would be the final message she ever sent. Surveillance footage from a gas station on Old Woman Springs Road captured her next. Timestamp, 6:17 a.m. Emily walked in wearing a light hiking pack, hair tied back, the same calm expression she wore in every photo her family later gave the press. She bought 2 bottles of water, a protein bar, and a map refill card for her GPS app, though the clerk remembered she barely glanced at it. To him, she looked confident, comfortable, like someone who had walked these trails her whole life. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw her alive. Her car was discovered at the trailhead hours later. It sat perfectly parked, doors locked, keys not in the ignition. Nothing inside was disturbed. Her phone, expected to ping with its usual location drops, sent only one faint signal before switching to no service. Rangers combed the first mile of the trail in the early evening, expecting perhaps a sprained ankle, a wrong turn, or a simple delay. But Emily was an experienced hiker. She never strayed off marked paths without logging a note. She never ignored check-in times, and she certainly never failed to leave a trace. By 2:00, the next morning, the search expanded. State rangers, volunteers, and aerial crews began to grid the desert in wide, exhausting loops. The terrain was typical of late summer. Sun-baked rock, thorn brush, and deep sandy cuts that swallowed footprints by noon. But Emily should have left something. A bottle cap, a slip of fabric, a print in the sand. Instead, the searchers found exactly nothing. It was as if she had stepped off the trail and dissolved into thin air. Her disappearance hit the local news by day 3. National networks picked it up by day 5. "Hiker vanishes in broad daylight" became the headline pushed across the country. Interviews with her parents flooded social media. Lily begged people online to search the area if they lived nearby. Her father described Emily as steady, smart, impossible to scare. But the desert is indifferent to experience. It has taken seasoned hikers before, through heatstroke, mirages, disorientation. The difference here was the complete absence of signs. Rescue workers noted it immediately. Every missing hiker leaves clues. Emily left none. No drag marks, no animal signs, no personal items. Even the dry washes, notorious for erasing tracks, showed nothing unusual. Within a week, investigators quietly admitted something unsettling. Emily Carter hadn't simply gotten lost. Something had intervened. And whatever happened between the moment she stepped off that trail and the moment she vanished, the desert wasn't telling. The search for Emily Carter grew into one of the largest desert rescue operations in San Bernardino County history. What began with a handful of rangers sweeping the Serpentine Wash Trail expanded into a sprawling, multi-agency effort involving sheriff's deputies, federal search analysts, local volunteers, off-road clubs, and even hiking groups who had never met Emily, but felt compelled by the eerie silence her disappearance left behind. By the third day, the desert looked like a grid sheet of fluorescent vests and dust clouds. Drone operators launched quadcopters in overlapping arcs, mapping every wash and arroyo. They scanned for body heat, clothing contrast, reflective surfaces, anything that didn't belong to sand and rock. Helicopters flew low enough that their blades stirred loose soil into spirals. Pilots traced cliff lines, sinkholes, abandoned mine shafts, and narrow canyons where sunlight barely touched the floor. The K9 teams fanned out next. At first, the dogs caught something, a faint human scent lingering near the first mile marker. But the trail died abruptly on a patch of loose gravel. As one handler explained, it's like she walked straight into the wind and disappeared. Every dog repeated the same pattern, a spark of recognition, then nothing. A week passed, then two. By the 1-month mark, the command tent at the trailhead looked more like a war room. Maps covered every surface, layered with red grease pencil squares showing where crews had searched. Some areas were circled twice, some 3 times. One ranger estimated that more than 240 square miles had been examined, on foot, by air, and through satellite-enhanced imagery. But no shoe prints, no clothing scraps, no dropped phone, no disturbance of brush or soil. Nothing. Search commanders were baffled. Even in worst-case desert disappearances, heatstroke, disorientation, falls, there are always clues. People leave something behind. Emily had left an absolute void. The only anomaly was a large, perfect rectangle of no search allowed on every map, a fenced federal parcel listed as U.S. research property, restricted access, decommissioned, do not enter. According to county records, the land once held a Cold War atmospheric research station active from the late 1950s to early 1980s. Reports claimed the buildings had been demolished, tunnels filled, and the entire property sealed for public safety. Rangers insisted it had nothing to do with Emily's disappearance. But some volunteers felt differently. One retired military engineer pointed out inconsistencies. The fencing was newer than the 1980s. Warning signs had been replaced recently. Fresh tire tracks cut across the dirt just inside the boundary. Government issue, not civilian. A helicopter pilot later admitted in confidence that when he flew too close to the property line, he received a sudden radio warning from an unknown channel. "Maintain distance. Course correct immediately." He'd never heard anything like it in a rescue mission. When the maps were updated for the 3rd week, a ranger quietly mentioned to another, "Funny how that's the only spot nobody's allowed to check. That empty square in the middle of the search." But no one officially challenged it. No one crossed the fence. And in that untouched rectangle of desert, sealed, silent, and wiped from public memory, the question lingered. If Emily didn't get lost in the desert, did she walk into something the government never meant anyone to find? When the official search stalled, when the red grids on the rescue maps stopped expanding, when the sheriff's updates shrank from paragraphs to single sentences, Emily Carter's parents made a decision no family ever expects to make. They hired a private investigator. His name was Jack Rowan, former Air Force military police, 15 years of desert operations, the kind of man who spoke little, listened intently, and carried notebooks instead of opinions. On his first day in Yucca Valley, Rowan spread every map he could find across the motel desk. County search maps, ranger trail drafts, Bureau of Land Management overlays, and historical topography charts dating back to the Kennedy administration. For hours he compared them, tracing each sector with a blunt pencil. He didn't look for Emily first. He looked for what everyone else had chosen not to see. And something immediately bothered him. The official search grid, the massive, heavily rechecked grid, formed a neat rectangle around a blank, square mile of desert. A perfect gap, not a hill, not a canyon, not a hazard zone. Just a silent square no team had stepped into. To most, it looked like a forgotten oversight. To Rowan, it looked deliberate. He dug deeper. He drove to the county archive building, a squat concrete structure with a flickering air conditioner and a clerk who wore headphones and didn't look up often. Rowan requested Cold War-era land use documents, expecting red tape. Instead, the clerk returned 2 dusty boxes marked U.S. Testing Range Files, 1960-1975, low priority, perfect. Inside the first box were brittle engineering schematics from 1961 to 1965. Blueprints of a facility labeled simply Cooling Shaft Testing Field, Mojave Sector. It once tested airflow for high-heat equipment used in aerospace research. Rowan had seen such layouts before on Air Force bases. Shafts, vents, pressure. Tunnels, emergency egress routes. But one thing froze him. On the original 1963 master schematic, drawn in fading graphite pencil, there was a handwritten note in the margin. Shaft line C, emergency access, secured. A shaft line, a hidden exit, a structure so deep underground that only emergency crews were supposed to know where it was. And modern digital maps? They showed none of it. Google Earth displayed a seamless sheet of sand. County GIS records labeled the area inactive dryland. The Bureau's database simply wrote, "Parcel retired, 1984." Rowan knew what retired meant. Not removed, not filled, not erased. Just forgotten on purpose. He flipped through more papers. Beneath the schematic lay a folded topo map from 1968. Faded, almost torn, but readable. It marked 4 cooling shafts. 3 were labeled as collapsed. The 4th, line C, had a faint star next to it, as if someone meant to return to it later. Rowan pressed his thumb on that star. Right there. Right in the middle of the no-search zone. Modern maps may have been clean. Digital overlays may have been sanitized. But the desert had a memory older than computers. And Jack Rowan had just found something that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. A missing structure. A missing shaft. And maybe, just maybe, the place where Emily Carter disappeared from the world. Jack Rowan entered the restricted square mile just after sunrise, when the Yucca Valley heat was still a warning rather than a punishment. The fence surrounding the zone was old, sagging, and full of gaps, not the kind of barrier meant to stop people, but to quietly say, "There's nothing here. Move along." Rowan didn't move along. He crossed the boundary and began a methodical grid walk, dragging the heel of his boot across the sand the way old trackers taught him. Slow, deliberate, eyes low. For the first hour, the land seemed ordinary. Dune ripples, scattered brush, the occasional scorpion darting for shade. But then the terrain changed in a way only a trained observer would notice. A stretch of ground ahead looked wrong, too even, too smooth. A perfect rectangle of desert floor where nature should have left uneven patches, root bumps, and broken shale. He crouched, pressed his palm to the soil. It was cool, cooler than the surrounding earth, as if something beneath the surface held the morning chill unnaturally well. Rowan brushed aside a thin layer of sand. A metallic gleam flashed. He froze, then cleared more. Beneath the dust, a surface emerged, flat, grey, and absolutely manufactured. A steel plate, 6 feet wide, perfectly rectangular, edges sharp, not eroded. He traced the side with his gloved fingers and found the hinges. They weren't rusted relics from the 60s. They weren't corroded Cold War leftovers. They were welded shut, the weld lines bright, clean, and unmistakably modern. Someone sealed this hatch not decades ago, but within the last few years, maybe months. Rowan leaned close, examining the welds. No cracks, no signs of stress. Whoever had done this didn't patch it in a hurry. They reinforced it to stay sealed. The thought simmered in his mind. If this was meant to stay hidden, then someone knew the old facility was still accessible. Then, something else caught his eye. A faint trail, nearly invisible unless viewed from inches above the ground. The kind made by repeated foot traffic, light but consistent. Not the work of wind, not the work of animals. A human path. It curved from the horizon toward the hatch, disappearing under a tumbleweed that clearly hadn't grown there naturally. Someone had placed it deliberately, like a lazy attempt at camouflage. Rowan stood slowly, scanning the perimeter. No fresh prints, no tire tracks. Whoever walked this path knew how to leave little behind. He reached for his radio, voice low but steady. "Rowan to dispatch. I need units sent to my location. I've found something. Steel hatch, welded shut. Looks recent." The line crackled. "Copy that, Rowan. Deputies en route. ETA 20 minutes. Stay put." Stay put. Rowan backed away from the hatch, taking a defensive angle, eyes sweeping the desert. He'd been in the Air Force long enough to know one rule. If something is sealed, someone sealed it for a reason. And reasons like that rarely mean safety. He waited in silence as the sun rose higher, casting the steel plate into a cold, unnatural shine at the center of an empty desert, a shine that seemed to whisper, this place wasn't forgotten. It was hidden, and someone didn't want it found. By the time deputies arrived, the desert sun was climbing fast, burning shadows off the steel hatch Rowan had uncovered. The cutting torches came next, 2 firefighters in heavy gear kneeling beside the welded seams, sparks spraying in tight, bright arcs. The smell of scorched metal drifted into the hot air like a warning. It took nearly 15 minutes for the first weld to give, another 10 for the hinge, and when the final seam cracked, the steel plate groaned open with the sound of something waking up after decades of sleep. A heavy breath of warm, stale air rushed upward, not the musty cool of long-abandoned structures, but the humid exhale of a place that had been sealed while still alive. Rowan leaned over the opening. A vertical shaft dropped straight down, 25 feet at least. The walls were poured concrete, the dense, overbuilt kind used in Cold War military tests. A ladder of reinforced steel rungs still clung to one side, immaculate for its age, free of rust except for a few shallow streaks. Someone maintained this, Rowan muttered, and not in 1974. Deputy Morales swung her flashlight down the shaft. The beam caught the floor below. Smooth concrete, swept clean, no debris, no dust. Nothing about it fit the idea of an abandoned testing site. One by one the team descended. Rowan went last, boots clicking sharply on metal. When he stepped onto the corridor floor, a chill rippled across his arms. Not from temperature, the air was warm, unnaturally so, but from the silence. A silence so complete it pressed on the ears, as if the hallway absorbed sound rather than echoed it. Flashlights sliced through the dark. The corridor stretched forward, perfectly straight, walls bare, joints clean. No graffiti, no cobwebs, no animal droppings, not even dust. Abandoned places never looked this untouched. "Looks operational," Morales whispered. Rowan nodded. Or recently used. At the corridor's end loomed a reinforced door, thick, bolted, built to withstand pressure. Its locking mechanism was newer than the concrete around it, a hybrid of old metalwork and modern replacement parts. It took a battering ram, 2 crowbars, and a hydraulic wedge to force it open. The hinges screamed, the door buckled, and then it swung inward. Flashlights poured into the room. The first thing Rowan noticed wasn't the cot. It wasn't the figure on it. It was the temperature. warmer still, almost human warm. The kind of heat that came from breath, from presence, from the steady pulse of a living body in a sealed place. Then he saw her. A young woman lying on a narrow cot, limbs thin as twigs beneath torn fabric. Her hair clung to her temples. Her eyes were open but glassy, staring at nothing. She looked half shadow, half skeleton. Rope burns darkened her wrists. Her ankles bore older scars, pale and healed. A plastic jug of water sat beside the bed, half full, fresh enough that the condensation on the inside had not yet evaporated. Morales stepped forward, voice breaking. "Oh my God! Emily?" The girl's lips parted. Barely. A dry rasp escaped. The first sound in a place built to hold silence. "Help!" Rowan felt the ground drop under him. Emily Carter wasn't gone. She hadn't been lost. She had been kept, and someone had planned for her to stay alive. The deeper Rowan stepped into the underground room, the more the space seemed wrong, not just unsettling, not merely criminal, but fundamentally out of place, like something carved into reality that should never have been allowed to exist. His flashlight beam revealed the full dimensions: 12 feet long, 8 feet wide, low ceiling, poured concrete on every surface. No windows, no ventilation grates visible on the walls, just a single narrow duct line high near the ceiling, humming faintly with the weak exhale of a Cold War-era airflow system that should have died decades ago. Deputy Morales checked her handheld meter. "Airflow's real, low but steady." "Someone kept it running," Rowan said. "This isn't abandonment, it's maintenance." The more they looked, the clearer the truth became. Someone had been caring for Emily Carter, just enough to keep her alive. Canned food wrappers lay beneath the cot, crinkled and recent. Most were off-brand survival rations sold only in certain surplus stores. A low-grade camping stove sat in the corner, still warm beneath its metal plate. The smell of scorched aluminum lingered in the air. 3 plastic jugs of water sat lined up neatly against the wall, 2 empty, 1 half full. "Whoever did this wasn't starving her," Morales murmured. "He was rationing, measuring." Rowan crouched beside the cot and touched the rope fibers scattered across the concrete floor. The texture matched perfectly with the deep abrasion marks across Emily's wrists and ankles. The fibers were fresh, frayed less than a week. He swept his light across the floor. Fresh footprints, unidirectional, deep heel compression. One set leading toward the door the team had forced, another set leading toward the back corner of the room. A back corner that shouldn't have had shadows. There, half hidden behind a stack of metal crates, Rowan found it. A narrow SE, cess panel, industrial steel, smooth handle, scuffed at the edges. He pulled. It didn't budge. But the dust at the seam told a different story. Someone had shut it recently. Very recently. The concrete nearby still held the warmth of a handprint. "He was here," Rowan whispered. "Not days ago. Hours. Maybe minutes." A cold wave rippled through the room. While the search team had been cutting the hatch open, while they were clearing the shaft, while they were preparing to descend, someone below had been listening. Someone had known they were coming, and had slipped out through whatever passage lay behind that panel. Morales examined the floor again. No exit tunnels on record. Nothing on the original schematics. "That's because this wasn't on the schematics," Rowan replied, tapping the panel with his knuckles. The metal vibrated slightly, hollow behind it. He built his own way in, and his own way out. Emily stirred faintly. A rasping breath escaped her. Rowan moved closer, speaking gently. "Emily, Emily, can you hear me? You're safe. We found you." Her eyes fluttered, unfocused. Then her lips parted around a single hoarse whisper. "He knew you were coming." The room fell silent. Rowan turned slowly toward the sealed access panel. The captor hadn't fled in panic. He had slipped away calmly, deliberately. And he had done it knowing his time in this hidden chamber was over, and that the hunt was only beginning. By dawn, the underground chamber had transformed from a rescue scene into a forensic grid. Every surface was photographed, every footprint traced, every object bagged and labelled. What investigators found over the next 6 hours didn't just identify a suspect. It outlined a method, a history, and a chilling level of preparation. The first major breakthrough came from a crumpled slip of paper wedged beneath the cot leg. At a glance, it looked like trash, but when a technician smoothed it out under the portable scanner, the thermal ink reappeared. A receipt from a hardware store in Joshua Tree. Date, 6 weeks prior. Items purchased: rope, nylon, portable stove fuel, hydration jugs, industrial sealant, a welding kit. None of it was random. Everything matched the objects found in the chamber and matched the timeline of Emily's captivity. Deputy Morales exhaled slowly. He planned every detail. He stocked up before he even grabbed her. But that was just the beginning. Near the ladder in the shaft, in a patch of undisturbed dust, forensics photographed a clear impression. A boot print, size 12, deep heel first, worn tread. When enlarged on the tablet, the sole pattern matched a specific make. Red Wing work boot, model 2412, discontinued in 2004. A niche item, expensive, rare, usually worn by long-time industrial workers. "Who still wears boots from 20 years ago?" a tech muttered. Rowan gave the only answer that made sense. Someone who stopped living in the world 20 years ago. Then the lab unit called out from near a rusted equipment crate. They had found traces of hydraulic fluid on the floor, the type used in outdated industrial cooling systems. Systems not used anywhere in Yucca Valley anymore. But they had been used extensively in one place. The Cold War cooling shaft testing field. The same restricted land Emily had vanished near. The picked ear sharpened with each new fragment. Near the emergency duct, a tech lifted a torn scrap of fabric with tweezers. Dark fleece, pilled, sun-faded. A small patch of desert burrs clung to it. It didn't come from Emily's clothing. It came from someone who lived outside. Someone who slept rough, moved quietly, blended with the desert. Then, the most damning evidence emerged. Inside a dusty metal locker, sealed but not locked, sat an old, corroded ID badge. The photo was grainy, but the name was unmistakable. Evan Caro, cooling technician, U.S. Research Division, employment period 1981-1999, status, terminated for cause. Caro had vanished shortly after his firing. No forwarding address, no tax record, no utilities. Locals whispered he lived off the grid, drifting between abandoned mining camps and derelict structures. Rowan stared at the badge a long moment. Caro would have known every tunnel in the testing field, including Shaft Line C. Morales added quietly, he didn't just know the shaft existed, he helped build it. The implications settled in the stale air like dust. Caro had access to abandoned infrastructure, technical knowledge to keep the airflow running, the skills to weld, seal, and maintain an underground space, a pattern of isolation. And now, a link to Emily's disappearance, but one question hung heavier than all the evidence. Why use the shaft? And even worse, if he escaped minutes before they arrived, where was he now? The discovery of Emily Carter alive should have ended the nightmare, but for investigators, it marked the beginning of something far more urgent. Whoever had kept her alive underground for weeks hadn't simply vanished. He had slipped out through one of the auxiliary ducts minutes before the rescue team arrived. That meant he was on foot, moving through the open desert, with hours of head start and decades of experience living unseen. The manhunt began before sunrise. Deputies fanned out across a 30-mile radius. Old mining trails, forgotten homestead roads, abandoned water tanks, and makeshift camps were swept one by one. Air support from San Bernardino Sheriff's Department combed the washes where runoff carved deep hiding spots. Thermal drones were brought in, the same equipment used to catch cartel smugglers moving through the national park. But the desert is a maze, and Caro knew every inch of it. The first major break came at an off-grid trailer located 20 miles from the shaft. The trailer wasn't on county maps. It didn't have power lines or a mailbox. The only sign it was inhabited was a metal pail catching condensation from a patched roof and footprints leading to a dry creek bed. Inside, deputies found exactly what they feared. Bundles of nylon rope, empty cans of high-calorie protein meals, a rusted camping stove matching the one in Emily's chamber, and scattered across the table, a reprinted Cold War blueprint of the cooling shaft testing field. Several areas were circled in red ink, including the exact location of Shaft Line C. But the coldest discovery was a spiral-bound journal thick with frantic handwriting, pages crammed with cryptic diagrams, dates, and sentences that spiraled off the margins. The team photographed every page before bagging it. One entry, written shakily across 2 pages, stood out. She followed the trail like they all do. A curiosity is the only map a person needs. Another read, the desert keeps who listens, the underground keeps who obeys. Detectives believed these weren't metaphors. They were patterns, hints Caro had lured others before Emily. A forensic tech stepped outside the trailer and quietly said, "This wasn't improvisation. He's been preparing for years." At dusk, deputies discovered a shallow fire pit near a dry arroyo. The ashes were still warm. Someone had burned clothing, dark fleece, like the scrap found in the chamber. Tracks indicated a lone man moving north toward a drainage culvert beneath an old service road. They found him just past midnight. Evan Caro was curled inside the concrete pipe, knees to his chest, breathing shallowly. He didn't run. He didn't raise his hands. He simply stared at the flashlights approaching him, blinking slowly, as if irritated that they had arrived sooner than expected. Deputy Morales aimed his flashlight at Caro's face. "Evan Caro, stand up. You're under arrest." Caro complied without protest, without confusion, without a word. But as the cuffs tightened and detectives pulled him to his feet, he finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost relieved. "You opened the hatch," he said. "So it starts again." The words chilled every man in the culvert, because they understood exactly what he meant. Emily Carter might not have been his first, and she might not have been his last. The trial of Evan Caro began 8 months after Emily Carter was rescued, and from the very first day, the courthouse in San Bernardino was overflowing. Families of missing hikers, journalists from every major network, former Cold War historians, survival specialists. Everyone wanted to witness the case of a man who had used the desert as both a trap and a hunting ground for decades. Caro was brought into the courtroom thin, blank-eyed, and disturbingly calm. He never looked at the audience, never looked at Emily's parents, never acknowledged the deputies who captured him. He sat with his hands folded, expressionless, his head occasionally tilting as though listening to something no one else could hear. His defense team immediately pursued a predictable route, plead mental instability. They claimed he lived in total isolation for years, suffered from delusional thinking, and viewed his underground chamber not as a prison, but as a protective refuge. But prosecutors were ready. They had spent months reconstructing Caro's life, a life hiding in plain sight. They presented 2 decades of reports. Trespassing incidents at restricted government land, complaints from hikers who reported being watched from ridgelines, stalking claims made by 2 women in the early 2000s, and repeated warnings issued by rangers about a man living out near the old shafts. They even discovered that Caro used multiple aliases to purchase tools, rope, and canned food. Each clue built a portrait of a man who was not delusional, but deliberate. Then came the journal. Over 500 pages of obsession, meticulous, chilling, organized. Prosecutors read selected entries. They wander because the desert calls them. Some follow the trail, some follow curiosity. Those are the ones worth keeping. The shaft sleeps until I bring it breath again. She was not the first. Chutut, he will not be the last. Mapping experts testified that Caro had charted unmarked trails, old mining paths, and forgotten service lines with incredible precision. He used geocache forums under several usernames to plant false coordinates, luring the curious into remote areas. A digital forensics agent explained how Caro tracked forum replies, watching which users took the bait. One of those users was Emily. When Emily testified by video, the room fell silent. She was thinner, paler, and her voice trembled with every sentence. She described the darkness, the isolation, the way Caro appeared unpredictably, sometimes after 2 days, sometimes after 10. He never spoke at first, she said quietly. He just stared, like he was checking something. Like he was taking notes in his head. Her words struck the courtroom like a blade. Caro did not react. After 6 weeks of testimony, cross-examination, and psychiatric evaluations, all of which concluded he was fully competent, the jury took less than 4 hours to decide. Guilty, on all counts. At sentencing, the judge delivered a statement that would later echo through every major news outlet. Multiple entries in his journal reference others. Identifying these individuals remains ongoing. Caro showed no emotion as he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. But as he was led away, one reporter swore she heard him whisper, "The desert keeps its secrets." And that was the most chilling part, because investigators knew the judge was right. Emily may not have been the only one. The rescue of Emily Carter should have closed the case. It should have marked the end of the story. A trapped young woman found alive, a captor arrested, a community shaken but healing. But the desert has never been that simple, and what investigators found beneath the Yucca Valley sands was never meant to see sunlight again. Within 48 hours of Emily's extraction, the federal government moved in with a force and speed that startled even local deputies. Convoys of unmarked trucks crossed the restricted zone. Engineers in radiation badges surveyed the shaft without explanation. And by the third sunrise, a concrete pour began, thicker, hotter, and reinforced with steel mesh, dense enough to withstand dynamite. The official statement was brief. Structural instability, site permanently neutralized. But neutralizing wasn't the right word. They were burying something. The restricted perimeter expanded by nearly a mile in all directions. Old fences were torn out and replaced with new ones lined with sensors. Maps of the region were updated quietly. No announcements, no press releases, no explanations. On digital mapping services, the area now appeared as a blank rectangle, grayed out as if it never existed. But people who worked the land knew the truth. Several weeks after the sealing, a Bureau of Land Management maintenance crew was repairing a remote survey marker when one of the workers pressed his hand against the newly cured concrete. It was warm, not sun-warmed, but internally warm, like a buried engine. He mentioned it to his supervisor. The supervisor told him to log the work and forget the rest. He didn't. Reports began to quietly circulate among maintenance teams. Warmth behind sealed walls long after sunset. Faint vibrations pulsing rhythmically through bedrock. Air drafts escaping from long-dead soil vents. Metallic humming deep below the earth, too steady to be natural. One crew refused to return to the site after a vibration rolled under their boots like a slow heartbeat. Another insisted they heard something metallic turning, the way gears sound when they begin to rotate after years of stillness. None of these reports made it into official logs. The same phrase appeared repeatedly in emails later leaked online. Do not speculate near the site. But it wasn't only workers noticing the oddities. Hikers on nearby trails, far outside the restricted fence, began describing strange sensations through online posts. Some felt the ground trembling softly beneath their feet in steady intervals. Others described a pressure in the air, like standing next to a massive generator behind a wall. One woman reported something stranger. When she placed her palm on a boulder near the restricted zone, she felt a vibration, steady, pulsing, as if something beneath the desert was communicating. Geologists dismissed the claims as aftershocks. Locals weren't convinced. Because the desert doesn't hum, it doesn't pulse, it doesn't warm concrete from the inside out. Whatever Evan Caro had been using that shaft for, whatever Cold War infrastructure the government once built, it hadn't stopped working. If anything, Emily's rescue might have woken it. And in the quiet of the valley, under the shifting sands and burning sky, some believe the machinery far beneath the desert is still running, or worse, still waiting. If you enjoyed tonight's investigation, give this video a like so more people can discover these forgotten pieces of American history. And if you want more stories like this, real cases, buried records, and mysteries sealed by concrete and time, make sure you're subscribed. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe. And remember, some places were never meant to be found.